So the parent's role in growing their children should also be a very important aspect in growing their perspective and experience and critical thinking. So it obviously, when it comes down to it, it starts young, and it's very possible to do. I don't think it's hard things to do. It's just people need to be willing to take that extra step to do these things. And when it comes tough is when they're older. And when they're older, it becomes much harder to convince someone to exit out a frame of thinking. And these people, these individuals, uh, I don't really have a perfect solution on how to convince these people. The only thing I can say about these is where I implore to other people who listen to the podcast is that you, as an individual who already have this type of thinking, have to be willing to be understanding and being willing to converse with people. For me personally, one thing that I am considering on my podcast, and I've grown into this mindset, is I have to be willing to have people on my show and converse with people I don't like and I do not agree with in any step of the word. But by doing that, I'll be able to understand what their point of view is, converse, maybe potentially change their mind, but at the very least, they have a certain type of thinking, and this is valuable. Someone that doesn't agree with me was willing to listen to me. And that piece right there, that piece, if it hits their mind, is another valuable piece that could either flourish, or at the very least, they can spread it to other people and that could flourish. So there's definitely potential things you can do.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. So let me say, like, I often think of it, and this isn't a novel idea, but this kind of just supports what you're saying of the importance of the youth and doing. So I have a son who's 9 years old, and I think about this all the time in that vein. It's almost as if like humans are born with this like virus that's in us, right? And it's like if you don't treat it at a young age, right, it gets too strong. And call that virus what you will, whether it's just the mental flaws of who we are in our minds, biases, blind spots, the ego, the subconscious, call it what you will. But like exactly as you're saying, it hits a point, like maybe it's high school, maybe it's whatever, a certain age, where that virus starts to like harden and take form. And if you haven't treated it at a young age, you almost have no chance, right? And it's if you treat that virus as a young age, now kids, it's not that you're telling them what to think. It's not that you're even necessarily telling them exactly how to think. You're just giving them a chance to think. You're giving them a chance, the tools to be able to say later in life, I'm going to do the things you've been saying throughout this conversation. I'm going to be critical thinking about this. I'm going to try and have an open perspective. I'm going to try and be objective. I'm going to try and understand and be empathetic to another person. But for whatever reason, we're born in such a way, our minds work in such a way where that's just not the natural path. Maybe society has caused it. I don't know. But what we've seen is that if you don't intervene at a young age, majority of the time it's not gonna go well, right? So I could buy that, and I do buy that, and I think there's a lot of value to that with the youth. But where it gets really tricky is, so like take the example you said, right? Even the idea of the field trips or the things parents should be doing. There's some parents out there that would say, all right, you have those list of 3 things that they should be doing. For them, number 1 on the list is keeping that child safe. Like that's my most important job as a parent, is to keep that child alive and safe and protect them and get them through life. And you have that mindset. It's not the only one, but that's just one example of one where it derails everything you're saying. They could still agree with the other points that you say, but if the most important thing is to keep them safe, well, now it's very hard to do everything you just said. Even the field trip piece of it, you can imagine people saying like, yeah, it's an interesting idea, but what about math and science scores? And like, we're losing to other countries around the world, and like, we need to be focused on that. And it's not to say any one of those is right or wrong. It just becomes this almost circular thing where what you're trying to bring forth and introduce and get people to buy into, it's almost as if they have to believe in it first to even accept the idea that they should do it for the youth. And if they don't, it's very unlikely they're going to accept it for the youth. So it's like, where does it start? How do you get the process started if sadly it's such a foreign thing for people these days, parents, teachers, educators, whatever? It's just not the natural course. And it's not the natural course because they don't value it. And if they don't value it, they're not going to make it the natural course. So like, how do you break through that and actually get the things that I think are good that you're recommending in place?
So that's also very important that you mentioned safety. We actually had a podcast episode recently where we talked about the values of freedom versus safety, because they are both things that pull on to each other. The more safety you may have, the less freedom you may have. The more freedom you may have, the less safety you may have. So it's definitely a push and pull. But when it comes down to it, to kind of incentivize these people, you obviously can only do so much. And the conversation and the pushing of messages is a important part as I converse with more people, as people I know converse with more people. So it has to be kind of like a chain reaction to the message that is being perpetuated here today and moving forward. And that's just how it's going to have to be as of right now. And the willingness to engage into the conversation with parents and framing how these conversations would happen is they would obviously ask questions. They would try to figure out, okay, when it comes to my safety of my child, I mean, that's important. But you also have to point out, well, as they ask their questions, is well, the safety is important, but that doesn't dismiss the ideas that they can have a certain level of freedom, a certain level of critical thinking, a certain level of experience and perspective in addition to that. So I think a lot of parents can do this. It's just obviously they have to figure out how to do this. And I think it's not necessarily a thing where, like you said, they're not thinking about it because they're maybe valuing the safety more, but that's the point. They're not thinking about it. They need to be thinking about it. They need to incorporate that into their parenting, and they need to figure out ways to do that. And that is why people should be spreading the message and spreading the idea to kind of help these parents do so.